I think first of all, to introduce myself because I've been here for the conference today, and we'll be here for two sessions and won't be for tomorrow. It's Pete Wallahan. I'm the federal member for Menzies. I'm a first-term member of federal parliament. I think I know about a third of the room here, and I know this venue very well. It's a fantastic RSL, and it's always a pleasure to come here. My task is to introduce Gary McKay MC OAM, and he will do a presentation and then facilitate a panel discussion afterwards. I know Gary by name and have met you for the first time today. Your book was compulsory reading for junior officer cadets when I was training. It really had an impression on me, and one of those books that I think impacted my life in ways that you probably don't appreciate and I don't appreciate. So Gary was conscripted into national service in 1968 and saw active service in Vietnam 3 years later in 1971 as a second lieutenant. You were a rifle platoon commander with 4 RAR, and during your tour of duty, you were severely wounded and returned to Australia. For your actions of gallantry and leadership in Vietnam, you were awarded the Military Cross, and you were the last Australian to receive the award. After a year in hospital, so that serious injuries, and you were built back together, Gary, you stayed with the Army with a permanent commission and commanded at company and battalion level in 8-9 RAR. You're a graduate from the Canadian Forces Command and Staff College, and you also served in the United States, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, and Malaysia. You retired from the military in 1998 after 30 years of service, and you are an author of non-fiction and some fiction books, as well as film scripts, and have done book readings and writers' workshops at conferences like this. You do regular battlefield tours of Vietnam, about 4 per year, and you are a prolific author. You've written 13 books, including the one that I have read, In Good Company. You've also written on Cyclone Tracy and many others. You live in Kiama with your wife, Margot, and you're working on your second novel. And I note here that you have Kiama's best Tangelo marmalade. I'm sure that's the thing you are most proud of. And you dedicate your spare time to ensuring quality control is maintained in the Australian red wine industry. I hope that's not just on the papers and you actually sample the products when you do it. So Gary McKay, welcome.
You can always tell them when a foreigner introduces you from Victoria because they call Kiama Kiama. It's rather posh. When I was teaching at the Staff College at Fort Queenscliff, the impudent young majors, the class that we just taught to the did a review, and at the end of it they said, what will they be doing in 15 years' time? And of course, they're pulling the piss out of all of the directing staff. And when they came to me, they said that in 15 years' time, I would be an interactive exhibit at the Australian War Memorial. So you're very lucky I'm out on day release today. I'm going to talk to the slides and hopefully, there you go. Okay. When I was 20, I was conscripted, ripped out through a lottery of a life of rowing surf boats, Newport. I lived on the northern beaches of Sydney, playing rugby. I was a rugby player even at 15. Drinking beer and in hot pursuit of Jennifer Ann Howard, who worked in the AMP Society where I was a trainee computer programmer when computers were steam driven. Okay, you probably know all that. I tried to dodge the draft by joining the CNF because I was in a championship surf boat crew. I became a gunner in 7th Field Regiment in Willoughby in Sydney, which stood me in good stead later on in Vietnam. But I got pissed off with the battery sergeant major who picked on me all the time because I was probably a smart one. And I ended up saying, I'll go in for 2 years, it can't be that bad, I'll get it over and done with. And 30 years later, I got out. I was selected to go to Skywell. And you had to be having your leaving certificate, as it was called then, the HSC. You had to have an IQ above that of the P and be physically fit. And the selection process they used for me, we still use today. It's a really good system. So I went through the officer training unit at Skywell, 26-week course. It was a pressure cooker. The exit point of the course was like that. You had to be able to lead an infantry platoon on operations in Viet Cong in Foot Creek province. That was it. That was the exit point of the course. We were assessed throughout, and you can see in my class, 53 graduated, about 8 guys repeated the second 3 months. But all the instructors were handpicked and they were brilliant, and they're all Vietnam veterans. I got sent to the 3rd Training Battalion at Singapore, which trained nothing but machos to be either paid soldiers or infantrymen. There were 3 companies for recruit training and 2 companies for IET for infantry. That's me in the middle there, second lieutenant with L plates. They kept me there for a year until we won the Hunter Valley Rugby Championship. I was the captain of the team. And then they sent me to 9 RAR, which has just come back to Vietnam. So then I ended up writing a letter, and if we get time, I'll tell you the 3rd lieutenant story. You'll love it. But I wrote a letter to the military secretary. My CO intercepted it, and I got sent to 4 RAR, which was getting ready to go to Vietnam. They had about 6 months before their second tour of duty. So I joined my platoon at Canungra with a sergeant who didn't want to go back. And that was pretty untidy. But great instructors at Canungra. It was like a finishing school for us before we went. Went through Canungra and I joined 4 RAR. The book that you referred to, In Good Company, I sent to my boss, Jim Hughes, right there. Jim had a military cross for his time in Korea. All of the guys on the bottom row were either company commanders, the IO, or one of the senior platoon commanders out. They'd all been in Vietnam. That's why the book got called In Good Company, because I was very lucky. I was in good company. And that's taken in Mount Stewart. We were in Townsville. So we did all the final exercises and all that sort of stuff before we deployed. And I probably don't need to show you that side, but we were told that, you know, we were going there to defeat communism, blah, blah, blah. Well, I can assure you, in 1971, when I deployed, we knew we weren't going to win the war. My sergeant and I had a discussion. My sergeant, a bloke called Darryl Jenkins, he'd been in 11, I had 11 platoons on the company 4, which is an Anzac battalion. But Darryl, you were told at Skywell, you know, you'll get across the old platoon sergeant, look after you and all that. Darryl was 4 years older than me. He was 27 and on his 3rd campaign. He'd already done Borneo, Malaya, and 1 tour of Vietnam, all with 11 platoon Delta Company 4 RARs, one of my section commanders. When we sacked my sergeant, he took his place. We went up to Sydney on the HMAS, up to Vietnam on the HMAS Sydney, a converted RN aircraft carrier, the world's slowest ship, in case you ever wondered. 10 days to get there. We had training on board, and I was the battalion shooting coach. Which is a bit unusual because when I got sent to Singleton, I'd never fired a rifle until I got into the CMF. And you could call my shooting wayward. I became a marksman with a Claymore mine, right? My company commander was a Queen specialist. And when he showed me up at how bad a shot I was, he sent me off and I ended up becoming a marksman. And then I became a shooting coach. And that's me there, running machine gun practice at the back of the flight deck of Sydney. So I did all that. And we used to put a bit of water in the balloons, chop them off the back, and engage them at 100 metres. Which is not easy because they're going on the wake and up and down. It was good fun. So we did all that. We did the rules of engagement. We got updates on what was going on in Vietnam. And every now and then we were allowed to have some fun. And on one day, we had tug of war and they had a pulley system, so both teams are pulling the same way and we're going pretty well. And then they brought the stokers, they released them out of the bottom of the ship and they were gorillas. They nearly pulled us through these bloody pulleys. So anyway, we left it. Then we had a crossing of the line ceremony, which was really how to humiliate all the officers. And volleyball in the plane hangar lift. That was fun when there was a bit of a sea running. And you got 1 can of Fosters per man per day, perhaps. That's me in the middle there. So we arrived in Vung Tau and we had a lot of equipment on board as part of the Colombo plan, which was going off to other places after they left Vietnam. We had most of our equipment, vehicles, they're all loaded onto those barges, but the troops flew off. He said the troops flew off to Nui Dat by a Chinook helicopter. And there's, oh, sorry about that. There's Nui Dat right there. It's about 60 k's across and about 60 k's deep. And the beauty about Phuoc Tuy province was that it was ours. We were our own masters and we owned the area. The fried eggs on the map are hills, so the rest of it was relatively flat, as that shot shows. And if it wasn't under cultivation, it was either primary or secondary jungle. And that's Nui Dat base. If you walked all the way around, you'd be probably 9 or 10 cliffs. You had an airstrip here that a very brave Herc pilot could land on, but C-123 providers and all that, and that's Kangaroo Pad there. That's where all the helicopters would lift us out from. SAS Hill in the middle, and the secretive 547 signal troop. I didn't know they were there until after the war, but that's where they lived. And the rest of us, all the battalions, a battalion there, another one here, and another one around the back, were living in the rubber. Right, it was an old rubber plantation. So we got off the Chinooks, and then we went into our hoochies. You see the duck boards there because in the wet season it would just turn to mud. But 4 men to a tent, sandbagged, revetted walls. Pretty good under the canopy. It wasn't too, I mean it was pretty hot. But the 2 seasons, the wet and the dry. The wet season it just rained, usually most afternoons, not for very long. But in the dry season it was totally different type of warfare. There I am, stud muffin, 23 years of age, porn star moustache. I shared that tent with my platoon sergeant. And you might note the patio border of 105 shells. But I didn't see this very much because in 1971, the task force had been reduced to 2 battalions. So I think I spent a total of 30 days in Nui Dat in our tour of duty. So the rest of the time we're out in the scrub. To steal the title from a really good book on jungle fighting in the Second World War, it was a war in the shadows. You could tell the grunts, the infantry, when they went to Vung Tau on R and C leave, we were pale because we're under the canopy all the time. All the pogos, the personnel on garrison operations, all the pogos had suntans because they're out in the sun. But we're in the under the canopy all the time, sleeves down, camouflage cream on, a hat, blah blah. It was all about stealth because we could not fight a war the way the Yanks fought it. There was no way. We had to be silent. It was all about looking, listening and smelling. Using field signals. You know, like, Corporal, come to me. Beware of leeches. Stop for a brew. That sort of stuff. It was all about paces and bearings for navigation. Because you couldn't step out and take a resection of a feature because we were in a world of green. It was all trees. And most of our actions were small unit actions. When I say that, I'm talking either sections or platoons. We didn't travel as a company except on specific operations. Most of the time, the company would deploy into an area of operations and we would patrol as a platoon. It was the platoon commander and the section commander's war. In the wet season, you could be like this for days on end. One of my diggers let out a scream one day. We were in an area like this. He got bitten on the back of the leg by a turtle. No, I'm serious. A turtle bit him on the back of the leg. And yet in the dry season, it was very hard because you could see a bit further because of the vegetation had thinned out a bit. But it was like trying to walk on a footpath covered in cornflakes and not make any noise. You just couldn't do it. You had to be really quiet. Most foot patrols, between 9 and 10 kilometres a day. Most of our patrols were 2 to 6 weeks. My platoon probably averaged 4 weeks out in the field. No front line. And resupplied by chopper. You all know the role of infantry, really basic. Close with and kill the enemy. But the contacts, the firefights that we had, were usually between 10 and 15 metres, especially in the wet season. They were short, sharp, violent. And it could be all over and done with in 2 minutes. Our contact drills were aggressive. We ran to the sound of battle. Once we had a contact front, the diggers would drop their packs and they'd close to try and form a fire base and then hook into the enemy. We were always going forward. The light infantry, I love the word light infantry, whatever. That's like saying military intelligence. But really, most backpacks between 25 and 30 k's. In my platoon, we carried 18 claymore mines, and my platoon usually averaged between 28 and 32, if we were lucky. Because you always had someone left behind on rear details or required for something or other, or just not coping. He might have a bad cough and he couldn't go if you're doing ambushing. You notice the amount of ammo we carried. We had a reference to the Battle of Long Time earlier. When Harry Smith and Delta Company went out on that very first big fight, that first big battle, they had 60 rounds. They had 3 magazines. Why? Because that's what they experienced when they were in Malaya and Borneo, right? They weren't expecting 5 Viet Cong regiment to mass and loiter with intent outside the task force base. So by the time we were there, a bloke with an SLR carried up 6 magazines, and a guy with an M16 carried 10. We were lucky later on we appropriated some 30 round M16 magazines. And in the machine guns, the gun crew, the 2-man gun crew of the M60, they carry about 800 rounds. But we're an Anzac battalion, so we had a company of Kiwis, and those guerrillas could carry 1,000 rounds into 2-man gun teams, because they were built like round fridges. And we used to have 800 on the gun, and then we'd have another couple of links, a couple of belts, in amongst some of the other guys who weren't carrying claymores. I consider it to be the toughest form of fighting. Fighting in the jungle is extremely hard. Command and control, just one of the things that you have to contend with. And personal camouflage was essential to survive. The Americans, however, totally different. They went in loaded for bear. They operated as companies and battalions. A good book to read if you haven't is called Matterhorn, and that will describe what it was like for the Americans up in the centre of Vietnam, in the mountainous area. So our modus operandi was totally different. We didn't have the manpower or the combat power to do what they did. The Viet Cong. I had a company commander called Jerry Taylor, who was ex-Brit Army, and he'd already done one tour of Vietnam. But that's a quote from Jerry Taylor down the bottom. To disrespect the enemy was to invite failure. And he always referred to the Viet Cong as Charles. Never Victor Gage, Charles. But these guys could never be underestimated. The NVA, from July onwards in our tour of duty, we only ran into the NVA. We didn't run into any more Viet Cong or Viet Cong main force. The Viet Cong main force, so we got Viet Cong main force, NVA. We had a really big fight against the Viet Cong main force on the Song Ka, River Ka, in a bunker system. And then we had a really big one at the very end, which I'll talk about in a minute. I was awarded the John Trelaw Research Grant after I put out a couple of books, and I used that money to go and study Vietnamese at the School of Modern Languages up in Brisbane, which made me probably Australia's worst Vietnamese linguist. Because I'm deaf in one ear, think of Vietnam. But I wanted to do that so I could then go and interview the enemy and find out what they knew about, what they thought about us. And this is what a guy who had fought at Long Tan said about Australians, because we were welcomed back, and this is now late 90s. He said, I said, why do you treat people who invaded your land, disrupting your drive for nationalism? And he said, you buried our dead, you took care of our wounded. In other words, we didn't shoot the wounded. We try to do things for the people of Fukui, and that's winning hearts and minds, putting in bridges, railroads, windmills, water reticulation, all that sort of stuff. And it was still working when I was back there years later. And he said, and you did not commit atrocities. Most of our operations are what we call search and destroy, or search and clear. That's battalion headquarters tack in the field. You can see how light we are, right? There's Jim Hughes with the RSM and the OPSO out in the field. But the idea was to find them, fix them and destroy them. It was all counterinsurgency. As opposed to up in the north of the country, where in I Corps and 2 Corps, that was almost conventional war. You know, a mate of mine and a fellow, and a co-author, Bruce Davies, he did a tour with 1RAR, then he did 2 tours with the training team. Bruce used to go out on a 2 or 3 week operation, and his Harvin Ranger Battalion would have as many casualties in that period of time as one of our infantry battalions would have in a year-long tour of duty. That was the difference. I mean, that's conventional war up there. So, 9th Squadron moved us around most of the time, and occasionally the US Army would come in and fly us from point A to point B out in the province. The beauty of it is it gave us the vertical flank and it allowed rapid reaction. It changed the way we deployed and manoeuvred, but it also changed, as we're all probably very much aware, about how we treated our casualties. That was the cover off my first book. That's my platoon, ready to get out on ops. When I asked this ex-Viet Cong guy, who would he have rather not fought? He said, the Australians. And I said, why? He said, because you're always under the umbrella of artillery. They hated it. And that was the thing. We had fire support bases, sometimes with a whole battery, sometimes a half battery, so that we always had indirect fire and support. So we always had it. The only people who didn't, of course, were the SAS, because they were too far out. And that wasn't their job anyway. Their job was to gather information. But I like that photo because it's just a good photo of these diggers who are out there. It's about week 3 on an operation. But the bulk of the combat power was owned by the Yanks. So like the Cobra helicopters, and my favourite piece of kit, the F4 Phantom. These guys saved our backside at the Battle of Nui Lai. We actually had naval offshore gunfire that provided for one of our operations down near the coast, and we had our own NODLO, our Naval Offshore Gunfire Liaison Officer, a Marine captain who came with his own helicopter, and he was coordinating fire from these guys into around the bottom of the long high hills. And that is like listening, if you've ever been in Wynyard Railway Station in Sydney, it's underground. That's what it sounds like when one of those shells is coming towards you. Now, I'm going to talk about 2 battles. Where am I going? I'm out of time already.
Hey, don't stop it.
Yeah.
Jesus.
I'll put the bill away.
That red dot there, that's the Song car. 274 VC Main Force dug in along a river, probably 200 or 300 of them, and we had a troop of tanks in support. That's after the battle. That's what happens when you fire rockets, cannon, artillery and tanks. It took us, says in the training band, it'll take you 100 metres, 15 minutes to go 100 metres. It took us 4 hours to go 250. The enemy were dug in, they would not surrender, and they were using captured American weapons, which made life confusing because you use sound a lot to figure out where you are. That's a bunker, and that's after we ripped the cover off it. So it made it very tough. X-shaped formation, so no matter which way you came into it, you're in a crossfire. And you wouldn't see those bunkers that were on top of them. They fought from out of the stairwell. These guys were brilliant. We did a formal company attack, 2 platoons up with the trooper tanks in support, and we'd never practiced it. We made it up as we went. The initiative of the Australian soldier. But they changed the battle. We only lost 1 killed, 4 wounded, and we destroyed the headquarters of 274. But the enemy would not surrender. The last battle in Vietnam was the Battle of Nui Lai. And the government announced to the world that we were pulling out in August on One Tan Day in 1971. Thank you very much for that. Meanwhile, the 33rd Regiment NVA, who lived in our area, go, aha. So they decided to come back into the province and kick our backside one more time. Our SIG Inc. guys picked up on this, and so we deployed up into the area where they were coming out of Long Khan province into Phuoc Tuy. And at this battle, which was the last battle fought by Australians, 21 September 71, it was in the jungle. That's a photo years later, but this whole battle was in jungle at the foot of the Nui Lai Hill. The bad guys, and I've actually met the guy who was manning a 12.7 of an anti-aircraft hull, were on top of that hill trying to shoot Jim Hughes out of the sky. We had no tanks. They'd been sent down to Woman Tower, had the turrets lifted off so they could be backloaded. Well, we're withdrawing. Why would we need armour? My platoon on this one day had gone through a whole tour of duty without a casualty. And we'd had a lot of contacts. We'd been in the Song car. But on this day, I lost one of my machine gunners shot to death, and my sergeant and I were wounded. I won't go through all that. If you buy me a beer later, I'll tell you a great story. But it really started the day before. On the 20th of September, I had a platoon-on-platoon contact with these guys. We knew they were NVA. They had chest webbing, pith helmets, and canvas jungle boots. And they were aggressive. And I had a 30-minute firefight with this other platoon. I was trying to outflank him, he was trying to, blah, blah. Then on the 21st September, my platoon, on its way to join the rest of the company, had 2 big contacts against 60 enemy each time. And it was only because I deployed Claymore mines, because we were track spotting, that we stopped them. But we had a company attack in the afternoon. In my assault group, I had 2 sections up and a section on the flank to protect our flank. And it must have, I can't help but think of Long Tan. I couldn't believe the noise that hit us. The enemy were throwing grenades at us, RPGs into the trees, and so on and so forth. This is an idea of the firepower the Yanks had. This is what we called down in front of our company when we realised we were outnumbered about 10 to 1. Okay? We had about 110 from Delta Company in the field, and if you've ever had napalm dropped near you, you know how scary life can get. But that's the amount of support we got from mainly the Yanks and some 9 Squadron Bush Ranger choppers. All of that. And they were great attitude adjustment tools. That stopped the enemy from overrunning us. But then we had to do a fighting withdrawal. We'd never done that. We don't go backwards. It's not heard of. But we had to do a fighting withdrawal. I had to leave 3 of my dead on the battlefield, and they were recovered 24 hours later when Victor Company came in, and they swept back into the battlefield, and the guys were there untouched, all headshot. I got nailed 2 bullets through the shoulder. That's why I love cops and robbers movies on TV. You see a detective, mudguard, gets a 45 through the shoulder, and the next day he's at work with his arm in the sling. Don't believe it. But I had my shoulder shattered, and one of those bullets missed me by about that much in the head. 6 months in that much plaster, which was then fiberglass. The upside was a young digger from 9RAR, both legs broken in a motorcycle accident. He and I got together in the sunroom, and we became an unbeatable 500 player. Unbeatable. We cheated like shit, but so it took 12 months to be reassembled because the armour-piercing AK rounds, which were fired at a distance from here to the spy banner by an NVO soldier up in a tree, took a long time to fix. We start pulling out of Nui Dat, and when we were told we were leaving, we had this awful taste in our mouths. We felt like we were letting our South Vietnamese mates down, and we'd met quite a few of them. It was awful. It was bloody awful. Normally in these presentations I talk about all that, but the big thing that got me was noise. Noise in battle. It disorients people. You can't give words of command. In the J, I needed someone to go and get the machine gun from one of the dead gun crews, but no one could hear me, so I did it. McKay going forward equals military cross. And that was it. It was all about the noise. I said this last night at dinner. I don't see post-traumatic stress as being a disorder. I think it's normal. You know, we send people from a normal environment into an abnormal environment where people are trying to kill each other and don't expect to have a result. You know, it's not nice. On return to Australia, I thought it was pretty awful, the apathy or animosity I felt for the Nashos who were going back into Civvy Street. Half of my platoon were Nashos, and it was the same in the battalion. It took about a year before, you know, we were sort of accepted back into the community as Vietnam veterans, and then the ironic part of it was some people started being wannabes and wanted to be Vietnam veterans and making up stories, and I thought, yeah, how ironic is that? But the bottom line is, ladies and gentlemen, it created a bond with my diggers. We still have a platoon reunion every couple of years, the survivors. I've lost more to cancer than we had in combat, and I'm sorry I've run over time, but thank you for your attention.
That was excellent, Gary. Let's get instructions on time for questions. How are we doing?
He's not an MC, time doesn't apply.
Well, why don't I just open it up for some questions, but you ring the bell when you think we're done with that and ready for the next session. So, up the back.
Did the enemy have an equivalent to AP frag and AP blast?
Are you talking about what sort of weapon?
Anti-personnel mines, like did they have an equivalent to the Claymore and the blast and frag?
Yeah, for a Claymore they had a thing, and the the nomenclature of it depended on the size of the rubbish tin lid. It was either called, like a D10 would be a 10-inch diameter.
Strip.
Could be a saucepan lid
Yeah.
full of C4, nuts and bolts, screws, bits of old scrap.
So they were improvised.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
but they had a big warehouse, a big storehouse provided by the Australian minefield for M16 and M14 mines.
So they're lifted then.
Oh shit,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. That's it. Brilliant talk.
Can I ask one question? You had a slide where you noted how well regarded the enemy were, of how you treated wounded and no atrocities. That is a debate and an issue from Afghanistan. What I'd like to know is, at the time, was there an information war where the opposite was being said about you, and what they said years later was to their surprise? Or did you have a good reputation during the time as well?
No, when Goof Whittlers came to power, did I say that earlier? Sorry. When Whitlam came to power, one of his cabinet members went to Vietnam, and he visited the site of where a bloke called Chad Sherin ran an ambush. Now, Chad was a sergeant in 8RAR, and he went to the dark side, became an officer, and when I was commanding 89, Chad was my battalion second in command with an MM. Chad ran an ambush outside a village not very far south of Nui Dat. He went in as the patrol commander because his platoon commander was off on R&R, I think. So he had about 30 guys. They ambushed a paddy bund and waited for the enemy to come along. But the enemy came in on another paddy bund a bit further away, out of range for what they wanted to engage with. So Chad picks up his platoon, moves it and drops it down in front of the other paddy bund. At night, 2 blokes at a time, reset all the Claymore mines, and was going to be court-martialed because he moved his position in the middle of the night, which makes the gunners, really upset because you've got to redo all the DFs around the map. But anyway, the enemy come back out and Chad takes out 23 of them. No loss to his patrol. Takes me with in a Claymore ambush. Trying to remember who the politician was. He goes to this thing and he is told by a Viet Cong, former Viet Cong soldier, that the Australians had cut up the dead enemy and the Australians had feasted on their kidneys and livers. Now, the average Australian digger, rifleman ECN 343, wouldn't know which side of the body to cut out for the kidneys, let alone do that sort of thing. It was just all rubbish. And of course, it made the press, but it was very quickly shot down. We didn't have that sort of thing. If you went into a village, you could tell very quickly by the attitude, the way they looked you in the eye or didn't look you in the eye, about whether they were pro or con. But we didn't do that very often. Most of the time, we were out in the weeds trying to find the enemy camps. Because these guys, the Viet Cong, did it so tough. They had to live in the field, with very limited medical support. And, I take my hat off to those guys.
With that, thank you, Gary. If we could give him a round of applause. And I've got a gift for you.